Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to our little series of podcasts with the title Health and Disease, A Perspective. And Alex and I are going to continue our conversation looking at how we think about health and disease, trying to step back a bit and say, what's going on in the things that we assert or are being asserted about health and health problems, as people would say. So, Alex, perhaps you could kick us off by saying what you want to talk about today.
Thank you very much, Peter, and hello to everybody. My primary thought was that we're talking about health and disease, but it could be anything. But how we view something, and this is an assertion, how we view something necessarily determines what we're seeing. And if there is an assumption that how we view something, or rather our perspective, is the one and only way in which we can see something, and we take that as a sort of rigid or dogmatic standpoint, then as far as in my understanding is, then nothing else will change, because it'll always, that idea, that notion, that hypothesis, if you like, is that as we are looking at something from a particular standpoint or in a standpoint, and we don't change it, it'll always appear the same. But in what my sort of goal, if you like, is to find a way of beginning to acknowledge that, recognize it, and actually do something about it.
Great. Okay. So I'm really looking forward to hear, how you take that further. My sort of task today was to look at something called Occam's razor. So I just want to present a little bit of historical background really about that and what it is, what it means to use those words, and how we can apply it to the question of what we say about health and disease. So again, back to you, and you can start us off.
What I was thinking about, I looked up Occam's razor, and one of the interesting things that came to mind when I was reading about it was this idea of problem solving and getting to it in as simple a way as possible. But I think and you'll help me with this, Peter, but if my understanding of Occam's razor is that it's perhaps more about arriving at an answer, but using the least amount of assumptions.
Yeah, that's it in essence. In essence,
which is not quite the same as if there are several ways of arriving at an answer. Mm-hmm. I think that some people have talked about it as using the simpler one.
Yeah. So we could sort of summarize it by saying a simpler explanation of a phenomenon is more likely to be correct than a more complicated one. Okay, and it's been said in numerous ways, and of course it's not an idea that's unique to a chap called William of Ockham. I thought I should just say a bit about him. He was a Franciscan friar, and he lived between about 1287 and 1347. He was quite a controversial figure. So he challenged the existing scholasticism, as represented most famously by Thomas Aquinas. And he also was involved in various sort of political issues and sort of confrontation with the Pope at the time. So it's an interesting story, but not really the focus of today's discussion. But anyone who looks into it will find it very interesting, I think. Just a couple of quotes which are definitely from him, right? I wanted to find something which he actually said. He said, "It is pointless to do with more what can be done with fewer." And he said, "Plurality should not be assumed unnecessarily." Okay, and that ties in with earlier philosophers. For example, Aristotle said we may assume the superiority, other things being equal, of the demonstration which derives from fewer postulates or hypotheses. And an earlier scholastic called Grosseteste, he said, for if one thing were demonstrated from many and another thing from fewer equally known premises, clearly that is better, which is from fewer, because it makes us know quickly. Okay, so those are the basic concepts involved, as actually said by philosophers.
Yes, yeah, that's so there's a theme. There's a theme running through all of that, and
Yes.
what's interesting, and if you're not, if you don't necessarily agree with me, that's fine. But what I'm hearing, and I'm wondering whether I can sort of dovetail or segue this into the way I'm thinking as well, is that particularly where health is concerned, and if we take, for example, I mean, the elephant in the room as was COVID.
Yes.
And the sort of what people were saying at the time, officially, the official version of events, and then you had the sort of alternative version of events, and in some cases very, very extreme alternatives, the whole sort of conspiracy theories, etc., etc.
Yes.
And so, and I was interested in particularly about truth. And I don't just mean truth as in like the legal aspect of truth and lies, etc., when you're telling the truth or whatever it is. But really, when people perhaps conflate opinions and facts and the truth, and I've got the sense that people are becoming more and more increasingly muddled, and giving way too easily to conflating one thing with another and just jumping on one bandwagon and then sort of going almost in the opposite direction again, etc. And rather than actually just sort of a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, let's follow this person because they look good or they sound great or they're very passionate or whatever it is, I'm going to believe, etc., without actually examining anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way I do believe there is a way of looking at something but keeping it simple?
Yes.
And what I said at the beginning about our own perspective,
mm-hmm.
I am very much of the I'm going to use the word opinion, but I very much believe this idea that the notion that we don't, seeing through a glass darkly.
Yes.
We may believe that we see things clearly, that when I look outside at everything around me, the physical world, that is real. But there have been moments in my life when I've had moments of I don't know, disturbed moments, if you like, where I've begun to question, hang on a second, is that really what I'm looking at? Or do I need to look again? Yeah. And to me, it's first of all having that disturbing realization that perhaps the way I'm looking at something isn't the be all and end all.
Yeah.
Thing. And that in having that first disturbance of questioning that maybe by finding a different perspective to look at it, suddenly, almost as if by magic, the thing that I've been viewing changes entirely.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, this is the difference. This is not my opinion. This is what I've experienced for myself.
Yeah, that's it. So, we make assumptions, don't we, about the explanations of our reality, and the background to it. And I think if we are open-minded, there are times when those are challenged, those assumptions, and we move on to a new perspective. And this is part of being human, and it's part of human history that people have actually sat down and sort of tried to get to the basics of thought patterns and what makes sense, and this idea of logic, that we have an inner ability to analyze things and to look at different propositions, let's say, explanations of reality, and respond to them. So what is called Occam's razor? Okay, this is a principle, and it's not something, I mean, there's this word in philosophy, heuristic, which in more common terms, rule of thumb, you know, so ultimately it's not about some set in stone thing that always the simplest solution is the best. But, you know, if you've got to decide quickly, on the whole, that's the case. And this is, I would say, a fairly obvious reality of the world, you know. So again, being using philosophical terminology, you know, the principle of parsimony, which is like the fewest number of entities assumed. And then there's also principle of elegance, if in just the nature of the argument as a whole, that it's simpler and more elegant. And just to give examples would be, you know, the one classically you're hearing about, you know, why the child's room is a mess, okay? And, you know, simple explanation, you know, he's on his phone all the time and he doesn't spend any time tidying up, okay? But the child could say, well, you know, some pixies came, you know, a team of pixies came and messed it up. Okay, now the pixie becomes an entity, right? And then if it's a team, it's several entities, you know, which are posed. And so, you know, this is a sort of rather fanciful type thing, but it's, you know, it's posing entities, and it's more likely that it's some mundane explanation like the first one than with these extra entities. You know, with the phone, it's an entity we know exists, it's there, and the fact that people spend a lot of time on them. So, you know, that's a kind of example of this mode of thinking in everyday terms.
Well, that's really interesting, particularly what you said about the elegant or law of elegance and the heuristic,
yeah,
the heurism, because the rule of thumb, I mean, would that bring in gut feeling?
Yeah, that's a good question. To some extent, I mean, I think that it is a separate issue, but on the other hand, you could take it as the sort of intuitive side of this.
Thank you. That's why I brought it up, because you probably, I'm sure you've had it. In fact, I'm sure we've all had it. And in fact, I'll give you an example. I can remember we were at a Christmas party with my wife when she worked in the NHS, and there was one of the GPs, her colleagues was there, was a very, very highly intelligent, very intellectual individual, and he was persuaded by the other girls, the staff, if you like, to go on the dance floor. And I don't know whether you've ever seen, if you remember Peter Crouch, when he scored a goal, he would do this robotic dance.
Oh, yes.
Well, this doctor, I was watching him from the sidelines, and he was doing a Peter Crouch, but it was as though he was thinking what the move was going to be, the next move, and it didn't flow at all. And I was thinking, when you get somebody who's a really good sort of, you know, a live dancer, or someone who just, you know, they say moves with the music.
Yeah.
They're not using that part, that sort of intellectual part of their brain, the central nervous system, you like. They're using another aspect which works in a much faster way. And I was thinking about this when we make decisions, those snap decisions, those quick decisions, particularly when we're driving.
Yes.
If you start, and it's also if you go up and down stairs, if you think about going up and down stairs, you'll trip over. If you think you're driving, you'll have a crash. And so there's something else comes into play. And I wonder whether when people use, I mean, this idea of heurism, if you like, where the rule of thumb or something, I don't know whether that's a fair thing to put in, to say that there, but I wonder whether people, it isn't just necessarily based on a theory or dogma. They perhaps intuitively brought a lot of information together, facts, knowledge, what it feel, when people say it feels right or whatever it is. I mean, would that come in?
Well, that's it. Yeah. So we're a combination, aren't we, of these intuitions and a sort of logical consideration of the wider picture. But when we have highly charged issues like COVID, then a lot of this is being pushed aside, and we have to look at, what's going on here. People's thinking is being massively guided by the media in particular. And it's creating all sorts of issues. And so that's why we need to step back, maybe. I personally, I've always had an interest in this sort of topic in some sort of fairly low level of thinking about health, and that there are certain assumptions in commonly held beliefs about health and disease which seem questionable. And of course, this was accelerated for me by the COVID crisis.
Yes.
And so, I put a lot of thought, a lot of research into this. And so how I would apply this, I would say, okay, are we prepared to really stand back? Now, I know there are huge vested interests here. And so, they're not going to stand back and analyze tomorrow this situation. But anyway, the purpose of this podcast is to sort of reach out to anyone who just wants to begin to think about these things, maybe. So as far as the theory of disease is concerned, I would say, okay, if we analyze it from the point of view of Occam's razor, what are we talking about? What is actually going on? What are the assumption behind this whole system and industry we have, the healthcare industry? And what I see is the entities here that are proposed are called diseases, individual diseases, and there are, in fact, many thousands of these. What is proposed is that many thousands of diseases exist with different names. So you can have influenza, you can have bronchitis, diabetes, the list is endless, and you can have diabetes 1, diabetes 2, COVID 1, long COVID, I don't know, all these different things. So you have basically an increasing number of these entities. And these are, and you have something called symptoms, which are the product of some disease. And the process, there is a process of diagnosis whereby you connect a particular combination of symptoms with one of these diseases, this plethora of diseases. So I'm saying that is a very complicated proposition with a lot of entities. These diseases are entities. So you have symptoms, which are something real. We have these physical phenomena when we don't feel comfortable because we have spots or we're coughing or we have a fever. And these, everybody knows about these, we've experienced them. But then besides that, we have a whole set of thousands of entities which we're supposed to connect somehow with these physical phenomena. And that's what I'm saying, in short, is something that needs to be examined. Is that an elegant explanation of these physical phenomena? And can we really sustain this number of entities?
I absolutely, I'm in agreement with you in that regard. And I think it's taking it further, actually, and I'm sure you know this, Peter, if you were
Yes.
to look briefly at, say, Chinese medicine or different models of medicine that have been around far longer than the Western model of medicine, the current paradigm that we're in, you was like talking a completely different language. And I think this brings in this again, this idea that it is how you look at it. So if you have somebody from the Far East who uses the idea of chi, energy, meridians, ley lines, whatever you want to call them, the idea of the sort of heat and cold and wet and dry and all, which is quite simple actually. And rather than all these names, that as you said yourself, I mean, mentioned a few of them, and there is a plethora, as you say, of conditions with all the confusing symptoms, and some of the overlying, the symptoms for one disease are very similar to symptoms for another disease. So trying to work out what the hell's going on. But actually, I've often wondered that there is a very simple and straightforward principle at work. And I think it's actually, if you look at the word dis-ease,
yes,
and if you split the word into dis and ease,
yes,
what is that phenomenon is as a result of something going out of order.
yeah,
The system, if you study basic structure and function, the physiology, etc., of
yes.
how the human body works,
Mm-hmm.
it works in an order. It works in a harmony.
Yes.
It works in an integrated whole.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when that integrated whole, at some level, for whatever reason, goes out of sync, if you like, and it's allowed for that to happen long enough, and in some cases long enough, but in some cases, obviously in children, it doesn't have to be that long, that actually you then get this manifestation of
Mm-hmm.
symptoms and signs,
Yes.
etc., which show that that particular aspect of the body is diseased. It is.
Yeah.
It's out of order.
Yeah.
It's out of harmony. It's out of sync with everything else that's going on.
Yeah. So I'd like to pick. Yeah. Sorry.
No, go on.
I'd like to pick up on the word used, energy, right? And you referred to philosophies where fewer energies are opposed, and I think that's a key thing. So obviously these symptoms, these physical manifestations, are the product of some sort of energy. Now, some sort of, maybe some Chinese philosophy or something is proposing a few, one or two. I'm not sure, but surely fewer energies is a more satisfactory explanation than many. So we not only have a multiplicity of energies proposed, but they are also destructive energies. They're also, it seems, some sort of malevolence. These are energies in as I understand the popular view. I mean, this is just what it seems to be saying. It seems there are thousands of malevolent energies, right, which are out to destroy your health, even kill you. That seems to be the assumption. The whole narrative of this is that there are thousands of these energies, and you have to find the right one. And one doctor says, well, it's this one. Another says it's that one. And there's a lack of certainty about what they are. Whereas a more satisfactory view is that there's a single energy responsible, or at least fewer anyway. And maybe that it's a positive energy. That would be another thing. Maybe there's a positive energy at work here rather than lots of negative energies. So
it's very, very interesting you say that, because I've been doing something called Qigong for best part of a year.
Oh, yeah.
And there is an idea of, Qigong preceded Tai Chi. Tai Chi was sort of born out of Qigong, if you like. But it certainly uses the idea of energy and also the flow of energy.
Yes.
Also the connectedness of the energy in our systems with the energy of the whole of the earth, if you like.
Yes.
From the ground, and the idea of this yin and yang and all this sort of stuff, which I don't pretend to fully understand, but it's something that I think you're right. I think it's these sort of disease manifestations are, if because of what we are doing in our lives, or because of something that's, say, like a mistake, you can have genetic mistakes, you can have faults, if you like. I mean, there's a whole sort of range of different kinds of disorders, let's call it, that are categorized.
Yes.
And they can come about as a result of all sorts of different things. And then the result of that finally is that the body goes out of sync and you have this disease, if you like. And certainly the energies, I mean, people become toxic because something isn't working correctly. I would wonder that in many cases it's all very well tackling what you see on the outside, when actually all you need to do, I know this sounds very simplistic, but there's something internally that needs to be corrected or unblocked, a little bit like plumbing. If you think of the rivers of the body, the great rivers of the body, which mostly people think of as the blood vascular system, which includes both the arterial and the venous system, but there's also the lymphatic system, which people don't often talk about. There's also the nervous system that has a flow to it as well, as what's known as a trophic function.
Okay.
And also just generally having that idea of constant movement. So if things get blocked up because of one thing or another, then of course, whatever it is that should have been flowing around, that idea of energy stagnates. But I think this, what you say about the idea of one energy, I think there's one energy. I think what is something we don't talk about is that the quality of the energy is not the same. There are different qualities of energy.
Yeah.
And there are very, very base and low level qualities of energy, which you I'm sure have experienced when we go into a room and we feel what we would refer to as a very heavy or negative or oppressive atmosphere.
Right.
You can also go somewhere where you'll feel uplifted.
Yes.
There's a certain very healthy, positive vibe.
Yeah.
So I think there are different qualities of energy. But that can affect us as well.
Yes.
So, but what I'm expressing is a particular viewpoint, if you like, and also I think with what you said about Occam's razor, to keep it simple.
Yes, I think, yeah. So what we're seeing here perhaps is two things. We have sort of Western logic is saying, well, look, where have we come with our situation? So that's one side. And when we're looking at maybe Oriental approaches, it's a simpler approach. So there are different models. You've just discussed one, but if you're thinking of maintaining your health, you can have the approach of, well, there are these thousands of entities out there to get me. I hope one of them will get me, and I'll go to this system, this medical system, who can maybe protect me against some of them. And then if they come, they may be able to identify which one is attacking me, which one is, and then you down this whole massively complicated road. Or, which a lot of people do anyway. Think, okay, I'm going to look up, I'm going to eat good food, I'm going to get exercise. A lot of people now do that anyway, even if they believe in this sort of pantheon of diseases. Yeah. They will still have something countering that. Is the healthy lifestyle approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a question of these models, which are sort of in some sort of more or less equilibrium in people's minds. They're coming and going to different strengths, we could say. But people need to think about, okay, what's the degree? How much am I working on these assumptions? How much on the other?
Yeah, and what you say, people need to consider this.
Yes,
because it's that if we don't consider this, nothing's ever going to change.
Yeah.
And if we are constantly relying on one model, it may satisfy certain things, but it may never get to the nub of whatever is causing the problem.
Yeah,
satisfactorily, because we're only looking at it from one particular aspect.
Yeah. So I think it's all about being honest with ourselves, being honest with our reason, and also you mentioned intuition as well. And that's what we're trying to do. We're not saying, at least I'm not saying, tomorrow we need to change X, Y, Z. I'm saying, look, what are the assumptions, and we need to think about these and sort of get them in proportion and just keep up the discussion. So I hope that's what we'll be able to do in future podcasts, is just to sort of keep this discussion going, and see how we can develop it and see if we can get responses to that. And
Absolutely. I think if nothing else, funnily enough, I remember somebody saying to me once many years ago, questions are an aid to digestion.
Yes.
And the more if we think we know everything, we won't ask.
That's right.
We're too full up to receive anything else. But if we're not happy with our understanding, then we'll ask questions and seek for more, understanding that, knowing that we don't know everything, and thereby our own sort of landscape, both internally and externally, begins to change.
Yeah. Great. So, I mean, I think today we've achieved a lot. We've sort of established some basic questions that we're asking, and we've looked at certain trends in the way people think and how they react to things and what they do. So I think that's very positive.
Excellent.
And we'll be continuing this discussion. Yeah.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, me too, Alex. So, and thank you everybody for your attention to this. And we hope you'll tune in, and please, in the comments, we really want to hear people's comments, reactions, which will help us find direction as well. So see you all next time.